Captain Jake Morrison pressed his face against the cold window of the spaceship. Below him, the planet Kepler 442c spun slowly in the darkness. The world looked dead. Gray dust covered everything. Where cities once stood, only broken glass and metal remained. The radiation scanners on his ship beeped constantly, warning him that nothing could live down there. "Captain, you need to see this," said Lieutenant Amy Brooks. She walked over with a data pad in her hands. Her face looked worried. Jake turned away from the window. "What is it?" Amy handed him the pad. "The scanners are picking up something strange. Human DNA traces in the northern part of the planet." Jake looked at the readings. His heart started beating faster. "That's impossible. This planet has been dead for 200 years, everyone knows that." "That's what I thought too," Amy said, "but look at this. The DNA isn't old, it's recent, maybe only a few weeks old." Commander Rick Hayes walked over to them. He was a tall man with gray hair and serious eyes. "What are you two talking about?" Jake showed him the data pad. "We're getting fresh human DNA readings from the surface." Rick's eyes went wide. "Run the scan again, there must be a mistake." Amy shook her head. "I already ran it 3 times. The readings are the same every time." Rick was quiet for a long moment. He stared at the data pad, then at the dead planet below. "Get the landing team ready, we're going down." "Sir, the radiation levels are still too high," Amy said. "We'll need full protection suits." "Then get the suits ready too," Rick said. "If there's even a chance that someone is alive down there, we have to check." 2 hours later, Jake sat in the landing shuttle with 5 other crew members. They all wore thick white suits that covered their whole bodies. The suits had air tanks and radiation shields. Through the small window of his helmet, Jake watched the planet get bigger as they flew down. Dr. Lisa Hayes sat next to him. She was Rick's younger sister and the ship's doctor. She looked nervous. "The radiation down there is still deadly," she said through the radio in her helmet. "If our suits have even a small hole, we could die in minutes." "We'll be careful," Jake said. But his hands were shaking a little as he checked his suit one more time. The shuttle landed on what used to be the main city of the colony. Jake remembered reading about this place in school. 50,000 people had lived here once. They had farms and schools and hospitals. Now it looked like the surface of a dead moon. The team stepped out of the shuttle onto gray dirt. Their boots made crunching sounds as they walked. Everything was covered in a thin layer of ash. The sky was dark orange, like a permanent sunset. "Stay close together," Rick said through the radio. "We don't know what we might find out here." They walked toward what used to be the city center. Broken buildings stood like broken teeth against the sky. Cars sat rusted and melted in the streets. Jake tried not to think about all the people who had died here. That's when Amy saw them. "Captain, look at this," she said. She was kneeling on the ground, pointing at something. Jake walked over and looked down. In the ash, he could see footprints. Fresh footprints. They were made by human boots, and they looked like they were only a few days old. "My God," Lisa whispered. The footprints led away from the city center toward a line of hills in the distance. The team followed them for almost an hour. The prints were clear and easy to follow. Whoever made them had been walking slowly, like they knew exactly where they were going. The trail led to a cliff face made of red rock. At first, Jake didn't see anything special about it. Then Amy pointed to a dark opening in the rock. "There," she said. "Someone carved out a cave." The opening was just big enough for a person to walk through. The team turned on their helmet lights and went inside. The cave was deeper than it looked from outside. The walls were smooth, like someone had worked on them for a long time. As they walked deeper into the cave, Jake noticed something on the walls. Small lines were scratched into the rock. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They were organized in groups of 5, like someone counting days. "Look at this," Rick said. He was standing next to one wall, shining his light on something. Jake walked over and saw words carved into the rock. The letters were rough and deep, like someone had used a piece of metal to scratch them in. "Day 4847 since the bombs fell. My name is Daniel Carter. If you're reading this, humanity survived. The team stood in silence, reading the words over and over. Jake felt cold despite his heated suit. Lisa checked her computer. If someone has been counting days since the bombing, and this says day 4047, she did the math quickly. That's over 13 years. But the bombing was 200 years ago, Amy said. They kept exploring the cave. There were more rooms carved out of the rock. In one room, they found old equipment that looked like it came from the original colony. Water makers, air cleaners, and food-growing systems. Everything was old but still working. In another room, they found more writing on the walls. Day 6203. The radiation doesn't hurt anymore. I think I'm changing. Day 8891. I remember every face from the evacuation ships. 847 people I couldn't save. Jake felt his heart pounding. The numbers were getting bigger. If someone really had been here this whole time, counting every single day, this is impossible, Lisa said. No human could live this long. Not in this radiation. Not alone. But the cave was warm. Someone had been here recently. Very recently. There were fresh water containers and food packages. A sleeping area with blankets that still smelled like a person had used them. We need to keep looking, Rick said. If someone is really alive down here, we need to find them. As they prepared to go deeper into the cave system, Jake heard something that made his blood freeze. From somewhere in the darkness ahead of them came the sound of footsteps. Slow, steady footsteps, getting closer. Someone was coming. Jake grabbed his radio. Everyone stay together, someone's coming toward us. The footsteps got louder. The team pointed their lights toward the sound. In the distance, they could see a shadow moving toward them. A human shadow. After 200 years of death and silence, something was alive in this cave. Something that had been waiting for them to arrive. The footsteps stopped. Jake Morrison held his breath, waiting. His helmet light shook in his hand as he pointed it toward the darkness. Next to him, Amy Brooks reached for the weapon on her belt. Hello? Rick Hayes called out. His voice echoed through the cave. Is someone there? Silence. Then a voice came from the shadows. It was rough and deep, like someone who hadn't talked to another person in a very long time. You're real, the voice said. I thought I was dreaming. Again. A man stepped into their lights. He was tall and thin, wearing an old environmental suit that had been fixed many times with metal patches and tape. His helmet was cracked but sealed. Through the glass, they could see a face that looked middle-aged but somehow ancient at the same time. My name is Daniel Carter, the man said. I've been waiting for someone to come. Jake's mouth went dry. Daniel Carter? But that's impossible. Daniel Carter died 200 years ago. His ship was destroyed during the evacuation. The man smiled sadly. That's what everyone thought, including me for a while. Dr. Lisa Hayes stepped forward with her medical scanner. Sir, I need to check. You for radiation poisoning. The levels here should have killed you long ago. Daniel laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Go ahead, doctor. You won't believe what you find. Lisa ran her scanner over Daniel's suit. The machine beeped and made strange noises. She looked at the readings, then ran the scan again. Her face went pale. This can't be right, she whispered. What? Does it say? Rick asked. Lisa's hands were shaking. According to this, he's absorbed enough radiation to kill 50 people, but he's not dying. His cells they're different, changed, and his age readings don't make sense. Daniel nodded. The radiation here doesn't just kill, Doctor. For some people, 1 in a billion maybe, it does something else. It changes you into something that can survive what no human should survive. Amy checked her computer files. Daniel Carter, Corporal, Colonial Defense Force, age 28 when reported dead. Serial number 7739 Delta Kilo. She looked up at him. If you're really him, you'd be over 250 years old now. I stopped counting my age after the first 100 years, Daniel said. Time works differently when you're alone. Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. You've been here alone for 2 centuries? Not alone. Daniel said quickly. Never alone. Come with me, I'll show you. Daniel led them deeper into the cave system. As they walked, Jake saw that the caves were much bigger than he had thought. There were dozens of rooms connected by tunnels. Someone had spent years carving them out of the solid rock. I started with just one small room, Daniel explained, as they walked. But I needed more space, more room for all of them. All of who? Lisa asked. Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he led them into a large chamber. When Jake shined his light on the walls, he gasped. The entire room was covered in names. Thousands of names carved into the stone. Each name had dates next to it. Birth, dates and death dates. Sarah Miller, age 34, mother of 2 children. Daniel read from one wall. She gave her seat on the evacuation ship to a pregnant woman. Died in the first radiation wave trying to help other people get to safety. He moved to another section. Tom Jackson, colony engineer. He stayed behind to run the evacuation bay doors by hand when the computers failed. Saved 400 lives before the power core exploded. Jake realized what he was looking at. These are all the people who died here. Every single one, Daniel said. 15,237 people. I found them all. I buried them all. I wrote down their stories so they wouldn't be forgotten. Amy was counting the names on one wall. This must have taken years to carve. Decades, Daniel corrected. I had time. Lots of time. Lisa was still scanning Daniel with her medical equipment. Your DNA shows signs of massive cellular regeneration. Your body is constantly fixing itself. The radiation that should kill you is somehow keeping you alive. Daniel nodded. I figured that out after the first few years. I stopped getting sick. Stopped getting tired the same way. Small injuries heal in hours instead of days. Rick looked around the chamber. Why didn't you try to leave? Surely someone would have come to rescue you eventually. Daniel's face became sad. I tried at first. I sent distress signals for 30 years. But then I realized something important. If I left, who would take care of them? Who would remember their names? Who would tell their stories? He touched one of the carved names gently. Emma Rodriguez, age 8. I found her hiding in a school basement 3 days after the bombing. She was scared and alone. I took care of her for 2 weeks before the radiation got too strong for her little body. She asked me to remember her favorite song. I still sing it sometimes. Jake felt tears in his eyes. You've been the guardian of this entire world. Someone had to be, Daniel said simply. These people died trying to save others. Their sacrifice meant something. If everyone forgets about them, then they died for nothing. Daniel led them to another room. This one was filled with personal things. Photographs, toys, books, jewelry. Everything was carefully cleaned and organized. I collected these from the ruins, Daniel explained. Every picture tells a story. Every toy belonged to a child who played with it. Every book was read by someone who loved it. Lisa picked up a small teddy bear. It was old but clean. You've preserved all of this for 200 years? It's not just stuff, Daniel said. It's proof that they lived. Proof that they mattered. Amy found a wedding ring in a small box. How do you remember all their stories? Daniel tapped his head. I have perfect memory now. Another gift from the radiation. I remember every face, every name, every story. I remember the baker who gave away free bread during the evacuation. I remember the teacher who stayed to make sure all her students got on the ships. I remember the old man who sang songs to keep people calm while they waited. Rick was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, You could have gone crazy, alone for so long. Daniel smiled. I wasn't alone. They were with me. Every day I'd talk to them, tell them about what I was doing, ask them what they thought I should do next. They kept me sane. Jake looked around the room at all the preserved memories. This is incredible. You've created a memorial for an entire civilization. It's more than a memorial, Daniel said. It's a promise. I promised them that someone would remember, someone would care, someone would make sure their stories lived on. Lisa's scanner beeped again. Your life signs are stable, but they're unlike anything I've ever seen. You're not entirely human anymore. Daniel nodded. I know, but I'm still human enough to keep a promise. And that's all that matters. As they prepared to explore more of the cave system, Jake realized something amazing. They hadn't just found a survivor. They had found the most human person any of them had ever met. Someone who had chosen to become memory itself, to be the bridge between the dead and the living, and he had been doing it alone for over 200 years. Daniel Carter led the team through more tunnels. The cave system was huge. Jake Morrison counted at least 20 different rooms as they walked. Each room had a purpose. One was for growing food under special lights. Another was for cleaning water. One room was full of tools and spare parts. I built all of this myself, Daniel explained. It took me about 50 years to finish the main sections. I'm still adding new parts when I need them. Dr. Lisa Hayes was amazed. You did this all by hand? Daniel held up his hands. They looked normal, but Jake could see old scars and calluses. These hands have moved a lot of rocks over the years. The radiation makes me stronger than I used to be. I can work longer without getting tired. They came to a room that was different from the others. This one had a chair in the center and walls covered with more writing. But this writing wasn't names. It was like a diary written on stone. This is where I come to think, Daniel said, and to talk to them. Amy Brooks read some of the writing on the walls. Day 15, 4:32. Today I found a little girl's diary in the school ruins. Her name was Katie. She wrote about wanting to be a doctor when she grew up. I buried her diary with her bones. Day 23,891. The storms are getting worse. The radiation in the air makes the sky turn green sometimes. But the flowers I planted in the memorial garden are still growing. Life finds a way, even here. Rick Hayes looked at Daniel with new respect. You've been keeping a record of everything. Someone should know what happened here, Daniel said. Not just that people died, but how they lived, what they cared about, what they dreamed of. Daniel sat down in the chair. Even through his helmet, Jake could see that his eyes looked tired. Not physically tired, but tired in his soul. The hardest part isn't being alone, Daniel said quietly. It's carrying all their stories. Sometimes I wake up and I can hear their voices so clearly that I think they're really here. Mrs. Chen telling her children to be brave. Captain Williams giving orders to help people evacuate. Little Bobby asking his mom when they could go home. Lisa sat down on a rock near Daniel. That must be very hard. Daniel nodded. But it's also beautiful. I get to keep them alive in a way. Every time I remember their voices, they're not really gone. Jake looked around the room. On one wall, he saw a large carving that looked like a map. What's that? Daniel stood up and walked to the map. This shows where I found everyone. Every person who died here. I marked the spot where I buried them and wrote their story. The map was incredibly detailed. It showed the entire colony with thousands of small marks scattered across it. Next to each mark was a number. Person number 1247 was found in the hospital, Daniel read, pointing to a mark. Dr. Martinez. She stayed to help injured people evacuate. Found her in the children's ward. She died protecting 3 kids who were too sick to move. Amy was studying the map closely. You found over 15,000 people? 15,237, Daniel said precisely. It took me 43 years to find them all. Some were easy to find. Others were buried under collapsed buildings or scattered by the storms. Rick shook his head in amazement. One person couldn't do all that. Daniel smiled sadly. You'd be surprised what one person can do when they have forever to do it. Jake noticed something else on the walls. Pictures drawn in what looked like charcoal. They showed people doing everyday things. A woman baking bread. A man reading to children. A group of people laughing together. Did you draw these? Jake asked. I'm not a good artist, Daniel said. But I wanted to show how they lived, not just how they died. These people weren't just victims. They were teachers and bakers, and engineers and parents. They had hopes and dreams and fears just like everyone else. Lisa was examining one of the drawings. It showed a young woman holding a baby. "This is beautiful. Who was she?" Daniel's voice became soft. "That's Maria Santos. She was 19 years old. The baby is her son, Carlos." When the evacuation alarm went off, she couldn't find Carlos. She spent 2 hours looking for him instead of getting on a ship. She found him trapped under some fallen shelves in their apartment. She dug him out with her bare hands, but by then the radiation was too strong. I found them together 3 days later. She was still holding him. The room became very quiet. Jake felt tears in his eyes again. "She could have saved herself," Amy said. "But she didn't," Daniel replied. "That's what makes her a hero. That's what makes all of them heroes. When the worst thing possible happened, they chose to help each other instead of just saving themselves." Daniel walked to another part of the room. On this wall were hundreds of small carved symbols. They looked like flowers or stars. "What are these?" Rick asked. "Each one represents an act of courage I witnessed or heard about," Daniel explained. "The man who gave his oxygen mask to a stranger. The woman who carried an injured person for 2 miles. The teenager who went back into a burning building to save a cat. Small acts and big acts. All of them matter." Jake counted the symbols. There were at least 500 of them. "People think courage is about not being afraid," Daniel continued. "But real courage is being afraid and doing the right thing anyway." These people were terrified, but they still helped each other. Lisa stood up and walked to Daniel. "You're one of them, you know. You chose to stay here and honor them. That took courage too." Daniel shook his head. "I didn't have a choice. Well, I did, but it wasn't really a choice. How could I leave them? How could I let their stories die with them?" Amy was looking at her scanner. "We've been down here for 3 hours. We should head back to the ship soon." Daniel's face showed panic for just a moment. "You're leaving? We have to report back," Rick said gently. "But we'll come back. We'll bring more people. Scientists, historians, people who can help preserve what you've built here." Daniel relaxed a little. "Good. This place needs to be remembered by more than just me." Jake looked around the room one more time. At the walls covered with stories, the drawings of people who had been dead for centuries, the map showing where thousands of heroes had made their last stand. "Daniel," Jake said, "what you've done here is the most important work any human has ever done. You've kept an entire civilization alive through memory alone." Daniel looked down at his hands. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Lisa said firmly. "Most people would have tried to escape. Most people would have given up. You chose to stay. You chose to remember. You chose to be their voice when they couldn't speak for themselves." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "They deserved to be remembered. Everyone deserves that. No one should die and just be forgotten like they never existed." Jake realized that they had found something more valuable than any treasure. They had found proof that love could outlast death, that memory could defeat time, and that one person's dedication could keep an entire world alive. As they prepared to leave this sacred room, Jake knew that Daniel Carter's story would become legend. The man who chose to be memory itself, who became the guardian of the dead and the keeper of their dreams. Daniel Carter walked ahead of the team through another tunnel. This one was longer than the others and sloped downward. Jake Morrison could feel the air getting cooler as they went deeper underground. "There's something else I want to show you," Daniel said. "The most important part." They walked for 10 minutes before reaching another large chamber. When Jake shined his light inside, he stopped breathing for a moment. The room was enormous, bigger than any of the others. The walls stretched up so high that his light couldn't reach the ceiling, and every inch of wall space was covered with writing. "This is the memory room," Daniel said quietly. "Every person who died here has their full story written on these walls. Not just their name and how they died, but who they were, what they loved, what made them laugh, what scared them, everything that made them human." Amy Brooks walked to the nearest wall and started reading aloud. Jenny Parker, age 26, worked at the Colony Bakery. She loved to make cookies shaped like animals for the children. She had a pet bird named Sunny who could say 12 different words. She was engaged to marry Ben Collins in the spring. On evacuation day, she stayed behind to hand out food to families waiting for transport ships. She gave away everything in her bakery for free. Found her body in the shop 3 days later, still wearing her apron. Lisa Hayes found another section. Marcus Webb, age 45, taught math at the Colony School. His students called him Mr. Webb because he always wore spider-shaped buttons on his shirt. He collected old Earth books and read stories to his class every Friday. He had twin daughters named Ruby and Rose. During the evacuation, he went back to the school 7 times to make sure no children were left behind. He saved 34 kids before the building collapsed. Rick Hayes was reading too. Anna Lopez, age 67, colony librarian. She knew every book in the library by heart and could recommend the perfect story for anyone. She made tea for visitors and always had cookies in her desk drawer. She refused to evacuate until she had saved as many books as possible. Found her in the library basement, surrounded by boxes of children's books she was trying to protect. Jake felt overwhelmed. There were thousands of these stories covering every wall. How do you remember all of this? Daniel touched his temple. The radiation changed my brain too. I remember everything now. Every conversation I ever had. Every face I ever saw. Every story anyone ever told me. But how did you learn all these personal details? Amy asked. Most of these people died before you could talk to them. Daniel smiled sadly. I'm a good detective. I went through their homes, their belongings, their computers. I talked to the few survivors I found in the first weeks. I pieced together their lives from photos and journals and letters. It took me decades, but I figured out who they were. He walked to one section of the wall. See this woman? Rebecca Stone, age 38. I found her diary in her apartment. She wrote about her daughter's first steps, her husband's bad jokes, her dream of opening a flower shop. I found photos of her garden. She grew roses and tulips and gave bouquets to her neighbors. Her daughter's bedroom was full of drawings that Rebecca had hung up on the walls. Daniel's voice became quiet. I found Rebecca and her family together in their basement. They were holding each other when the radiation got them. Even in death, they were still protecting each other. Lisa wiped tears from her eyes. This must be so hard for you to remember all the time. It is, Daniel admitted. But it's also an honor. These stories are beautiful. These people were beautiful. They deserve to be remembered completely, not just as victims of a disaster. Jake was reading about a man named Carlos Rivera, who had been a musician. It says here he played guitar and sang at the colony's monthly festivals. He wrote songs about missing Earth and dreaming of home. I found his guitar in his apartment, Daniel said. I learned to play it. Sometimes I sit in the memorial garden and play his songs. I like to think he can hear them. Rick looked around the massive room. How long did it take you to write all of this? About 80 years, Daniel said. I'm still adding details when I remember new things. Sometimes I'll find an old photo or letter that tells me something new about someone. Amy was counting sections on the walls. There must be millions of words here. Each person deserves their full story, Daniel said. Not just a name on a grave marker. They were real people with real lives. They had favorite foods and songs they loved and inside jokes with their friends. They worried about paying bills and getting sick and whether their children would be happy. They were just like you and me. Jake found a section about a group of teenagers. The Wilson High School Drama Club, 7 kids who stayed together during the evacuation. They kept everyone calm by putting on impromptu performances while people waited for ships. I found them in the school auditorium, Daniel said. They had dragged mattresses onto the stage and made a little camp. They died together, still practicing, lines for a play they'd never get to perform. Lisa was crying now. They were just kids. Kids who chose to help others instead of panicking, Daniel said. The youngest was 14. Her name was Sophie. She wanted to be an actress. Her friends told me she could make anyone laugh, even when things were scary. Rick sat down on a rock. He looked exhausted. Daniel, carrying all of these stories in your head. It must be like living with 15,000 ghosts. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "They're not ghosts. They're family. I know them better than I knew my own relatives when I was alive normally. I know their fears, and their hopes and their dreams. I know what made them cry and what made them proud." He walked to another wall. "This is Billy Chen, age 8. He collected rocks and knew the names of every mineral. His room was full of small stones he'd found around the colony. During the evacuation, he gave his lucky rock to a scared little girl to make her feel better. Daniel touched the words gently. "I found Billy's rock collection. I still have it. Sometimes I hold his lucky rock and tell him about all the new stones I've found over the years." Amy looked at Jake with worried eyes. "Daniel, don't you ever want to forget? Don't you ever want the pain to stop?" Daniel shook his head firmly. "Forgetting would be the worst thing I could do to them. Pain is the price of love. If I stop hurting for them, it means I've stopped caring about them, and they deserve to be cared about forever." Jake realized something incredible. Daniel hadn't just survived the disaster. He had chosen to absorb all the grief and love and memory of an entire world. He had made himself into a living monument to human dignity. "You're not just keeping their stories alive," Jake said. "You're proving that every single human life matters, that no one should ever be forgotten." Daniel nodded. "That's the most important thing any of us can do. Remember each other. Care about each other. Make sure that everyone who ever lived knows that their life had meaning." As they prepared to leave the memory room, Jake looked back at the walls covered with thousands of human stories. He knew that he would never forget this place or the man who had devoted his life to making sure no one else would be forgotten either. The team spent 2 more hours exploring Daniel's underground world. They saw rooms filled with carefully preserved toys, libraries of saved books, and workshops where Daniel had built amazing machines from scraps. Everything was organized and clean. Everything had a purpose. When they finally returned to the main chamber, Jake Morrison felt like his whole understanding of the world had changed. Daniel Carter had shown them what it really meant to be human. "We need to go back to our ship now," Rick Hayes said gently. "But we'll return with more people, scientists and historians who can help preserve all of this." Daniel's face showed fear for a moment. "You're not going to take me away, are you?" Lisa Hayes looked confused. "Don't you want to leave? You could come with us. You could see other worlds, other people. You don't have to stay here alone anymore." Daniel shook his head firmly. "I can't leave them." "But Daniel," Amy Brooks said, "you've done so much already. You've honored them for over 200 years. You've kept their stories alive. Someone else could continue your work now." "No," Daniel said quietly. "No one else knows them like I do. No one else has heard their voices or seen their faces in dreams. I'm the only one left who really knew them." Jake tried to understand. "But what about your own life? Don't you want to live for yourself?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. He looked around at the walls covered with names and stories. "This is my life. Taking care of them is what I was meant to do. If I leave, who will tend their graves? Who will sing Carlos Rivera's songs? Who will tell Jenny Parker's jokes? Who will remember that little Sophie wanted to be an actress?" Rick sat down near Daniel. "The radiation that keeps you alive here. If you leave this planet, you might die." Daniel nodded. "Dr. Hayes' scans showed that. My body is connected to this place now. The radiation here is part of me. Leaving would probably kill me." Lisa looked at her medical readings again. "I might be able to create a treatment. We could build a special environment on the ship that mimics the radiation levels here." "Even if you could," Daniel said, "I wouldn't go." Amy couldn't believe it. "Why not? You could have a normal life. You could meet new people, see new places." Daniel smiled sadly. "What's normal about leaving your family behind? These people are my family now. I know them better than anyone. I love them more than my own life." He walked to one of the carved walls and touched a name gently. Maria Santos gave up her life to save her baby. Tom Jackson died keeping the evacuation doors open. Dr. Martinez stayed with sick children who couldn't be moved. They all chose other people over themselves. Daniel turned back to the team. How can I dishonor their sacrifice by abandoning them now? They stayed and died to help others. The least I can do is stay and live to remember them. Jake felt tears in his eyes. But you'll be alone again when we leave. I'm never alone, Daniel said firmly. I have 15,237 friends keeping me company. I hear their voices every day. I see their faces in my dreams. They tell me stories and make me laugh and help me remember what's important. Rick stood up and walked to Daniel. What if we come back regularly? What if we bring other people to learn their stories? Daniel's eyes lit up. You would do that? Of course, Lisa said. What you've built here is the most important memorial in human history. People need to know about it. They need to hear these stories. Amy nodded. We could bring writers and artists. They could help tell these stories to the whole galaxy. Daniel looked excited for the first time since they'd met him. That would be wonderful. These people deserve to be known by everyone, not just me. Jake had an idea. We could make recordings of you telling their stories. We could create books and movies about their lives. We could make sure that every human in the galaxy knows what happened here. But I still can't leave, Daniel said. Someone has to stay with them. Someone has to keep the memorial clean and safe. Someone has to make sure their graves are tended and their stories are protected. Rick understood now. This isn't just your job anymore. It's who you are. Daniel nodded. I stopped being Daniel Carter the person a long time ago. Now I'm Daniel Carter, the keeper of memories. I'm the guardian of the dead. I'm the voice for people who can't speak anymore. Lisa checked her equipment one more time. Your vital signs are stable. You could probably live here for many more centuries. Good, Daniel said. I have a lot more work to do. I want to build a proper museum for their belongings. I want to plant more flowers in the memorial garden. I want to finish writing down all the stories I haven't recorded yet. Amy looked around the chamber one last time. Daniel, what you're doing here, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. You've turned a dead world into a place full of love and memory. Daniel smiled. That's what humans do. We remember. We care. We make sure that love survives even when everything else dies. As the Y team prepared to leave, Jake shook Daniel's hand. Even through their gloves, he could feel the strength there. Not just physical strength, but the strength of a person who had found their true purpose. We'll be back, Jake promised. We'll bring people who can help tell these stories to the universe. And we'll make sure you have supplies and equipment, Rick added. You shouldn't have to do this work with broken tools. Daniel walked with them to the cave entrance. Outside, the dead planet's orange sky looked less frightening now. Jake realized that this wasn't just a world of death anymore. It was a world where love had conquered death, where memory had defeated time. Thank you for coming, Daniel said as they reached their shuttle. It's been so long since I talked to other living people, but now I know that humanity is still out. They're still exploring, still caring about each other. Lisa gave Daniel a small device. This is a communicator. You can talk to us anytime. You don't have to be completely alone anymore. Daniel held the device carefully. I'll use this to tell you more stories. There are so many stories still to share. As their shuttle lifted off from the dead planet, Jake looked down at the small figure standing among the ruins. Daniel Carter waved goodbye, then turned and walked back toward his cave. Back to his work. Back to his family of 15,000 memories. Jake knew that Daniel had made the most human choice of all. He had chosen love over comfort, duty over safety, memory over forgetting. He had proven that one person's dedication could make an entire world immortal, and in the end, that was the greatest victory any human could achieve.